There is a difference between the inherent risk of an activity, which people can voluntarily engage in, and that is in the nature of the activity itself. If you sign a waiver to jump into the shark tank and swim with the sharks, you shouldn't be allowed to sue if a shark bites you. However, if you're diving in the shark tank with your scuba gear and one of the employees doesn't check the valves and your oxygen tank is not working properly because the person they hired is 18 years old and has had 5 minutes of training and doesn't really know how to operate the equipment, you are expecting as a parent that when you go, that the equipment you get and so forth at least has been the byproduct of responsible business practices where people have done their job, properly trained the folks that are working on that equipment, and have put you in a situation where you are not at some unknown or unnecessary risk. What a waiver encourages is bad conduct or lazy conduct, which can mean the same thing. Because now the 5 minutes of training of that employee who's 18 years old, who doesn't understand the importance of that equipment working properly while you're diving underwater, doesn't do his job, gets distracted while he's text messaging a friend and taking 3 phone calls, and lets the 9-year-old go down into the shark tank with improper equipment, and they end up with hypoxic encephalopathy, brain damage, and are on a respirator and receiving millions of dollars of care for the rest of their life. Now, we talk a lot in this chamber about personal responsibility. We talk about it. Are those words, or do they have meaning in terms of our philosophical policy approach to the way people should be responsible for their own acts in our society? A waiver is something that deviates from the concept of personal responsibility. To me, personal responsibility encompasses corporate responsibility. You cannot hide behind a corporate veil or corporate shield just because you have 500 or 50,000 employees and deviate and say, because we're a big company, we are not responsible for our actions, and that as between an innocent party and a party who is a bad actor, who has not acted responsibly, that you no longer have to take responsibility for your conduct. If we're going to deviate from that, then we should hold it to the highest possible standard. And that means that if we want to allow as a society people to engage in inherent risk, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. You can make responsible decisions about that because it's the activity, not the conduct of people that you're abrogating. But when you talk about releasing the negligence, gross negligence, or intentional act, and in this case of the amendment, it would simply be you're releasing the negligence of another actor, you are basically saying to someone, you are no longer personally responsible for your own conduct, someone else is. And let me just explain for 1 minute what I mean by that. If someone is injured, if a child is injured, the cost of those injuries don't go away. The cost of that release and the effect of that release is to cost shift the expense of those injuries to someone else, whether it's onto the parent, whether it's onto the parent's employer's health insurance, which in turn now will go up to be able to accommodate that added risk of having to absorb those costs, or whether it's the cost of our Medicaid program in the event that you are dealing with someone who is on public benefits. Now, I speak to this issue as your health appropriations chairman. We are sitting here confronted with one of the worst deficits in our history. You have heard repeatedly in this chamber that we don't have enough money for health care now, that we all wish we had more health care dollars to be able to provide the needed services to our most vulnerable. Well, let me tell you, one of the ways you find those dollars is by effecting policy that has as its consequence to hold people personally accountable for their own conduct and not shift that onto society or onto the taxpayer, who will now have to pay for those catastrophic injuries as a result of an avoidable negligent act. When you add that to the thousands of people and tourists that visit our state every day, where a state like Florida relies as its #1 industry on tourism, so we have millions of visitors every year coming here engaging in these activities, you can understand that the cost associated with caring for these catastrophically injured patients and minors, these minor children, can be catastrophic to our budgets as well, because we as a society will pay for those costs, rest assured. So I oppose this amendment because it violates my principles. It should violate yours. It stands in the face and opposite and contrary to the concept of personal accountability, whether that be corporate or personal. So I urge you to vote against this.